Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Scrutiny Management Committee public hearing with the Committee for Education, Sport and Culture. And today we'll be focusing on many of the issues in the committee's mandate. I'm Deputy Yvonne Burford, and with me on the panel are Deputy John Dyke, Deputy Simon Fairclough, Deputy Lindsay de Sumray and Mr Mark Huntingdon. Now, a Hansard transcript of the hearing will be published in due course on the Scrutiny website. And also, please be aware this hearing is being live streamed on YouTube, and a link can be found at gov.gg/scrutiny. We'll take a short comfort break at around about 10:50, and to mark Remembrance Day, we will observe a 2-minute silence in this room starting at 11 o'clock and then resume the hearing immediately thereafter. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so we would be most obliged if witnesses could keep their answers as concise as possible. Now, if everyone would kindly ensure your mobile phones are set to silent, and then perhaps you could please introduce yourself, starting with Mr Hackley. Thank you.
Thank you. Damon Hackley, Director of Operations, Economy, Infrastructure, Environment and Culture.
Sam Haskins, Vice President of Education, Sport and Culture.
Deputy Andrea Dudley-Owen, President of the Committee for Education, Sport and Culture.
Nick Hines, Director of Education.
Sophie Ruffsedge, Head of Education Operations.
Thank you very much. Right, so we're going to start off, perhaps not as you might have expected on the sixth form with it being front page headlines today, but on the issues of recruitment and retention. As you will know, Scrutiny is currently undertaking a review of recruitment and retention in the public sector. And in your response to the call for evidence, you state that it's vital that Guernsey is seen as an attractive employer. So do you consider that the terms and conditions that the states currently offer are lower than they need to be in order to attract and retain high-quality staff?
Well, thank you for that question. And obviously it's one that has concerned us and drawn our focus since the beginning of the term, and the context in which we've been working for this term. I know that some people don't like to be reminded of COVID, but it really has changed the landscape in many, many ways across many, many sectors, and teaching and education is not on its own in that respect. We have developed a workforce strategy, and I will hand over to officers to assist in giving some of the detail around that, but also the thoughts that we have around certain areas, certain subject areas that we need to concentrate on. But in terms of the terms and conditions, obviously you know that those lie with the employer, and obviously with union consultation. Those are areas that we are looking at. But if I can hand over to my Director of Education, that would be helpful. Nick.
Yes, so the question was about the terms and conditions with regards to the employer and supporting recruitment and retention. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we are in the having discussions alongside the employer about what current terms and conditions look like for teachers, and working alongside union colleagues to look at how we can review those terms and conditions throughout 2025. There are, without a doubt, some areas within those current terms and conditions which may facilitate recruitment and retention teachers in a different way, and the employer and the union colleagues and representatives of union colleagues are working really closely to see how some of those might be addressed. I think outside of that recruitment and retention aspect of terms and conditions, we are finding that our recruitment this year has been far stronger than in previous years, and actually the number of and percentage of teachers turning over in our settings last year went down quite significantly, which we can put down to greater stability, particularly within the secondary phase, and also some of the different ways that we are looking to seek to recruit and retain our teachers through some of the communications and advertising we're doing, but also through having really clear education strategy, demonstrating what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we're going to move forward. I don't know if Sophie's got anything to add from an operations perspective.
No, not significantly. Just to touch on the point that Deputy Dudley-Owen raised about our workforce strategy. So we've been working with our school leaders to develop a strategy for the next 3 years that really seeks to address some of the issues around particularly retention, ways that we can make Guernsey a really attractive place for teachers to come and work. So really looking and working with our union colleagues around well-being, We do a lot of pulse checks to actually see how the workforce is doing, how they feel about things, so tracking that data, really looking how we improve our pastoral and professional support through line management, making sure that's more consistent, and particularly really looking at professional development and how we can make sure that there is a clear pathway for every teacher, because not every teacher wants to go into a senior leadership role. We want to keep our best teachers in the classroom, so how do we support that? How do we keep people interested in the work that they're doing? But key to all of that is the work that we're going to be undertaking with P&R colleagues and unions on the conditions of service to review what are very outdated terms and conditions.
So it's obviously a big ongoing piece of work, because it leads actually into my next question, really. Which I think you may have largely answered, but we have also been contacted in this review by educationalists who are complaining that staff morale was is continuing to be negatively impacted by a number of issues, including what is quoted as being the excessive and ever increasing workload, much of it peripheral to teachers. Is that something that you recognise at all?
Did you want to?
Well, I think that we've conducted quite a lot of touch points with staff over the last 4 years, including staff surveys on culture and values, but also in terms of actually going into schools so that not only politicians in their role as governors are more visible, but also in terms of supporting employee relations as we work through, especially the reorganisation of post-16 secondary. We are absolutely cognisant that there have been a lot of initiatives going through this particular political term, and have put in place best endeavours to support staff, especially through our education strategy. And I think that the contribution of the education strategy network leads, who are staff members embedded within the school, they are existing school staff members, who are taking part within the education strategy, has helped to give staff members a broader, wider view of being part of the system as opposed to just within their own school, and also therefore what the purpose of a lot of the changes are. For example, the additional learning needs code of practice, the high quality inclusive teaching improvement. So we are completely aware that it has been a very, very workload heavy political term, and have been supporting staff, and there's different initiatives, the mental health and wellbeing strategy, etc., that have been put in place for teacher wellbeing.
I would say that there's always going to be members of staff who are unhappy for different reasons at different times. The surveys that we've carried out across all of our staff groups in individual schools and as a whole workforce, the most recent one across the whole workforce of our cultural values survey in January, actually showed predominantly really positive feedback from the direction that we're taking using the education strategy, and also that the committee is taking. And for the first time, and we did the cultural values survey. We've got 1,200 staff across the whole of education. We had 900 respondents for that survey, and predominantly the feedback around the personal values that people are showing is really what we want to see in education, but most particular, the desired cultures and the cultures that they've seen shift since the last survey detail things such as there is now a shared vision, there is now a shared set of values across the whole education workforce, and this appears to be a clear direction that they're picking up on knowing where they're going, what they're doing, and how they're doing it.
So you feel it's an improving situation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And the other main point that came out in the various responses we had where education is concerned was what was cited as the increasing frequency of behavioural issues in the classroom and the effect that has on teacher retention. And I think, perhaps you could respond on that point.
Absolutely. I think it's important to say that the behaviour relationships is also a key focus, And certainly we know that through Ofsted, quality of behaviour is measured and assessed in terms of the work that they do. And we also have a teacher tap survey so that we're able to ask staff members as well as parents for their views and perspectives on each individual setting and how people gauge behaviour within their school settings. We know that there's an increasingly positive behaviour for most schools, but we do know that there are areas, pockets of behaviour within certain schools that still remains to be it's being tackled. There's a more consistent approach, but we still need to see improvement, and that will come over time. But
I think there's two different sets of data and feedback which we can lean on here, which demonstrates that behaviour is improving and predominantly good in all of our education settings. If you look at the Ofsted inspections that we've had across all of our schools to date, all of our schools, including the most recent re-inspections, demonstrate that 100% of all of our schools and settings achieved good within our within inspection, and that's in comparison to 78% in secondary settings in England and 94% of primary settings in England. So with regards to external inspection of the overall behaviour of our settings, our external inspectorate is saying behaviour is good. We also, because we understand that colleagues and teachers and staff working in schools are always going to say that where behaviour is not good, it does affect teaching and learning. So we're really keen this year and last year that we're actually taking feedback directly from teachers, from head teachers and from all staff who are working in schools, so that where they're seeing issues or areas of behaviour that need to be improved, we know about it. So as Deputy Dudley Owen said, we're doing teacher tap surveys, which are very specific pulse check surveys throughout the year on very specific subject areas. Our most recent one from actually last Friday was on behaviour, and the feedback we've got from that was predominantly really positive from our settings. We do individual settings and an overall environment as well. And in every single one of our settings, if it wasn't already good, it has improved across different areas. And what we do is look at how content staff are at work, whether they believe behaviour is already good enough at school, levels of supervision, and the level of how behaviour is affecting learning. And in each of those different areas, that's improved since the last teacher tap survey we did. That doesn't diminish the fact, as Deputy Dudley Owen said, that there are individual cases of behaviour, as there will always be in all jurisdictions and all schools, which we need to deal with individually, where children and young people have individual needs and individual specific areas that they require additional support for.
Okay, Ms Rush, I think you want to come in.
Add that just because people may not understand what teacher tap is, it's a national survey tool, so it means that we're able to benchmark with schools nationally. And I think it is worth noting that in both phases, staff report that behaviour is significantly more positive than the benchmarks, so the national benchmarks, in terms of how content staff feel at work, which sort of goes back to our earlier question around retention, believing that behaviour is already good enough in their school, and levels of staff supervision and low levels of violence. So actually, whilst I think it is understandable that people will raise when there's a particular issue, we're definitely seeing a really improving picture and a very positive picture compared to our English comparator.
Thank you. I'll pass on to Deputy Summary.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to move on to education law and governance, if that's okay.
On that section, yeah. I had a couple. In terms of retention, how much is housing an issue and the availability, and how are you handling that? And my second one was in terms of behaviour. The figures for SEND pupils seem to be very high and going in an upwards direction. I just wondered how that was panning out, where that's likely to end up and what the cost of this is. I'm just minded that in the UK, I just read an article in the Spectator, I think it was, that 40% of councils could be rendered insolvent because of what they're spending on SEND arrangements. So I don't know, is that applying here? What's the situation here on that?
Well, we'll pick up that point second, if that's okay, Deputy Dyke. And the first one in terms of the housing, actually that was a question that was recently asked of me. Do you remember in States members' question time post education
I missed
statement.
1 week.
That's right, yes.
Unfortunately.
So Deputy Vermeulen asked that of me. And of course, accommodation is really challenging at the moment on the island, and we're going through one of those cycles of squeeze. And we work hard with new recruits to find accommodation for them. In fact, a lot of work is done, and that was reported into committee not too long ago about the itemising some of the detail behind that support that is given to relocators coming to the island to find accommodation. But invariably, it is a challenge because of the cost of living and cost of accommodation on island, and it has to be seen as a factor that might make us less attractive. But in terms of the additional learning needs, I think if Nick...
Yeah, in terms of additional learning needs, our percentage of children who have additional learning needs in school is actually dropping. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is around the additional learning needs code of practice we've brought in, and all the additional training and CPD that staff are having around that. But most significantly, the high quality inclusive practice document brought in this year, which is about upskilling and supporting all teachers to support children with additional learning needs in all settings. And I think that's really changed some of the perception about how children can be best supported within mainstream environments, but also identifying those with additional learning needs and making sure that support is given to them. I think what in particular we know is that although the percentage of children with special educational needs across our settings is falling, and I think part of that is because we are working with those families and children better than we were before, the percentage of children who have higher level complex needs and higher level needs which require a greater level of funding is increasing. And I think that's a picture which we're seeing in other jurisdictions, but also a picture which our colleagues in HSC will be aware of, where those young people who have got those more higher level complex needs do have a higher financial tariff than some of those young people we can support within a mainstream setting.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, onto law and governance. The committee's original proposals for a new education law were criticised and amended to the extent that the policy letter was withdrawn during debate. When will the revised policy letter be published?
So just the context for that, obviously we introduced the education law proposals in June last year. There were a series of amendments which is not unusual for primary legislation, and there was one particular amendment which deleted the entire provision of governance, which was one of the reasons for bringing a new refreshed education law back to the Assembly, as you'll know, and so it was withdrawn on a technicality, and what we have decided to do is to phase the proposals for bringing the education law back. A series of other areas have taken resources away from our ability to be able to bring more of the education law back in this term. So obviously revisiting the funding and refunding debate for Les Osway campus, Herm, Raquette, etc. But certainly this term and imminently we're going to be releasing the proposals for the governance part of the education law, with other phases of the education law to be released into the proposals for which, to be released in next term. Sorry, I was a little bit inarticulate there. My apologies.
Could I just come in there and ask you then which elements you intend to bring back this term and which
So the governance, sorry, I didn't explain myself very well.
Yeah.
So we've split the education law package into bite-sized chunks for argument's sake, and the governance package will come this term, remaining education law proposals to be determined by the next committee, and however they see fit, but possibly in two phases or one as they determine.
Okay, thank you.
And that's great. I would actually like to focus on the governance side, if that's okay. So that's handy that obviously you're well advanced, as we thought you probably would be. One of the uniting themes in the previous debate on the original proposals was that a majority of states members considered education to be over-centralised, perhaps. And a successful amendment instructed the committee to, and I'll quote here, to return to the states with proposals for far greater devolution of powers to the proposed governing bodies to allow them to genuinely govern, including the autonomy to decide the degree to which they choose to use centralised state services and resources, such as the finance and HR functions. So my question is, can we expect this proposal to be supported in the forthcoming proposals that you just described as imminent on the governance side of things?
Okay, thank you very much for that. There's a number of themes, and it's interesting because I think that the amendment that you referred to there was actually the amendment that deleted the governance provision, which was a great shame, because had it said to remain, then actually that particular narrative was covered within the policy letter. But there we go. That's water under the bridge now. When we're talking about the governance that we are undertaking now as an in-committee policy, there has to be recognition that there is a split between the governance model that we've put in place, which, let's say, is the vehicle, and the context of devolution and delegation, which could be seen as the destination. And that destination isn't entirely in our control at education. Obviously, members will be aware that some years ago, the policy and resources, or the States of Guernsey policy, was to centralise services in a hub and spoke model, and therefore a number of enabling services were broken off various committees, education included, and centralised into under the auspices of the policy and resources mandate. And that continued this term, finalising with facilities management being put into the hub and spoke model. So there's a split of education functions needed to run the education system in Guernsey and enabling services. And so we will be proposing a way forward to investigate exactly per the narrative within or the sentiment behind the amendment, and returning with a proposal as to how that's done. But it really must be recognised that there's a number of those services that this particular committee could not dictate how policy and resources would then break off, for example, finance or IT or facilities management or HR. Those are a number of the functions that I think states members are seeking to devolve into the schools themselves, but they're not within the Education Committee's gift to. Therefore, further work across committee does need to be done in order for that, the positive or negative, the SWOT appraisal of breaking those particular services off and devolving them into schools. But it's certainly not, the committee has an open mind on this completely, and there's a proposal that's going to be coming within the governance proposals as to how to take this forward.
Okay, so yes, I appreciate it's not in the committee's gift currently to do any of that, but it would be within the committee's gift to propose such a devolution in their proposals when they bring those to the states. But
may I just counter it? I don't think it is actually, because unless we had the evidence to suggest that actually it was a good or a bad idea, and ultimately, does it benefit the child in the classroom, the student in the classroom? Because that's what everybody really wants to know, whether devolution or delegation is going to be a good thing or a bad thing or a neutral thing for students in the classroom. Because if it's deemed to be bad, why would you do it? If it's neutral and there's a massive cost attached to it, again, why would you do it? But if there's a positive impact and it can be seen as value for money, then yes, let's get on and do it. But we can only determine that if we've got the evidence.
Okay, yes, and I think that that's exactly the kind of thing that people would expect you to have looked into in developing your proposals. But the committee's decided to implement its preferred model of interim governance boards ahead of the proposals coming forward, the new look proposals coming forward in presumably a policy letter. Will the committee be seeking approval from the states for this structure of IGBs to become permanent?
Yes, that's the obviously, as I said at the top of the conversation, the model of governance and devolution of delegation of powers and functions to those models in the future are they're two separate parts of the policy. Obviously, members will know, and for listeners at home, the policy of education governance is part of the Education, Sport and Culture's mandate, and it's referenced in the Blue Book. And therefore, it was for us to determine how we executed that policy and how we governed our schools. The school committee system was a very, very limited, outdated form of governance for our schools, and not every school benefited from a school committee, despite the immense work that's been done by school committee members over many, many years. Not all schools have benefited from that, and those school committees themselves have been hamstrung legally in only being able to look at two narrow aspects of behaviour in buildings. In the scope of their work. So the committee determined that in piloting and trialling what education governance might look like for states-maintained schools, a completely new concept really, that this was the best way to do it. We've had now 200 odd hours of direct governance experience. We know what works. We know what needs improving. We have appointed community representatives for our school governing boards now. So members of the public are now being, bless you, Deputy Dyke, are being inducted and onboarded for the IGB meetings that are now in play for this part of the term. So we think that the model has been very successful, and obviously there's once it's set in, we hope that the proposals would be accepted by the states, and then the policy would continue to be refined and made fit for purpose, for the purpose for which they were designed as we went on. For example, if we determined that devolution and delegation of additional powers needed to be given to the schools, then what we've set is a firm foundation for that policy to grow.
Okay, so to be clear, the new interim governance boards will have no devolution of power. There's no further devolution of power or decision making than under the sort of extant structure. Is that the case? That you're putting in place the vehicles to do that, but there is, as we speak, no devolution whatsoever to give those bodies more decision-making authority?
Well, going back to your original question, there is a split of education functions and enabling services. Obviously, education functions sit within the purview of education, sport and culture. P&R sit, with the enabling, the core services, which are the most often cited. Interestingly, it's most often the HR, the harder things that are cited as things that need to go down to the head teachers, down to the schools, to be managed therein. And again, that's just simply not in our gift to tell P&R that that's what they're going to do, that they will have to reorganise what has taken a lot of resources, I'm sure many millions of pounds, to change the model, to centralise a lot of these functions, to then redesign target operating models for specifically education, to then have those functions put down into the schools. So education functions have been delegated to schools, to head teachers. There's a larger amount of delegation and devolution of those functions than there has been previously. And that sits with the schools and obviously forms part of the governing function to hold those head teachers to account about how they are managing those functions and making their decisions.
Okay, and you've already described how you've already been through a recruitment process. What is the total cost of any recruitment, training and remuneration associated with the interim governance boards? Do you have any idea at the moment?
I don't have that figure to hand. Just thinking, do we have?
It's all been noted in our existing budget.
Yes, there's certainly no remuneration for the committee representatives individually. That's all pro bono. And in terms of the cost, there has been no additional cost outside of the committee's existing budget. But no, I don't have a figure to hand as to extrapolate exactly what it has cost the committee.
Okay.
Developing those proposals, because they've been done in-house, as I say. It was largely as part of the education law in terms of looking at the policy, but actually in terms of developing it, it has been a lot of extra work within house.
Okay, thank you. So you're probably not in, well, I don't know, maybe you are in a position. Are you able to explain what the main changes that you're coming back with? Is there any change in terms of the governance structure compared with the original proposals, or is it exactly as is?
Well, we're not far off publishing the proposal, so I don't really
I know,
want to
but
go
we've
into
already
an awful lot of
recruited to the
detail.
structure. This is the tension I'm trying to
Yes,
explore.
so the existing interim governance board structure is that we have chairs. Deputy Haskins and I sit as chairs. We've split the settings into two groups, and he chairs one lot, I chair the other. We have our community rep obviously has joined, and we have an officer from Education Office who sits as well. We are seeking to recruit parent reps and also staff reps in the next term as well. So what we're seeking to do is to populate those interim governing boards with external stakeholders and those from the school community, so that once we hope the policy is approved by the states, that the politicians are able to pull away and for external chairs to be appointed, so that these governing boards, with a view to that happening in September 2025, are taken on by the community as independent bodies, without the sort of link into the political committee as they currently are via us as chairs.
Okay, could I just check on that then? When you get to September 2025 and you have your independent chairs and the committee has stepped away, will any member of the governance boards, in whatever capacity they sit, be receiving any remuneration?
The proposals were to remunerate the chairs. Now, obviously, that is something that was the subject of an amendment by Deputies Trott and Saint-Pierre, and we would be paying close heed to that, especially given the current financial circumstances. But there was a precedent set by the Committee for Economic Development with the setup of their Tourism Management Board of paying the chair for that. But there's also obviously precedent with our non-voting members, who I think are paid £2,000 per year, who sit on states committees. So it's
in the order of that, if it was.
Well, I think it's something that obviously we're currently still under draft with the policy letter, with a hope to publish imminently, and there are certain areas that we have to look at to determine whether what level we think would be acceptable to the states, if any at all, in this current climate.
Okay, thank you. I think it's Deputy Fairclough on number 10.
Yeah, Deputy Dudley Owen, in a media release in March 2021, and I appreciate that's some time ago now, you stated that you were shocked at how the preceding committee had seriously depleted the staffing levels at the Education Office, and that you were committed to rebuilding the centre. Have you finished that process, and specifically, how many additional posts did it entail?
I cast my mind back all those years to 2021, and yes, the Education Office looked rather different when I took my seat again on the committee, as it had done, as opposed to the previous term. But the concern I had was not of a restructure. It was the lack of structure more than the depletion, because obviously we know that restructures can and reimagining, recreating, where we concentrate on where resources have their most impact, can actually be very positive. But that isn't what had happened. There was no restructure, and it seemed a rather disorganised depletion with no particularly strategic purpose behind it. That obviously has changed. There has been a strategic purpose behind the reorganisation of the Education Office and strengthening. And I think that, Nick, if you can comment to the rebuild.
Yeah, sure. I think it's fair to say that when I came into post, there was a restructure that took place across senior leadership team level, but then also across all the teams within the education service. It's interesting, and I think it's something which is a positive thing to say, and dispelling a few myths, in fact, that the current structure we have, if you like, across the education services and what people like to describe as the education centre is not costing any more money now than it was before. There may be additional or different posts, but they're all within the same budget envelope that we had and we work to year on year. The majority of posts that are included within the structure, excuse me, that you see or that is shared are actually peripatetic posts. Centrally, we have a very small team of education operations, which includes admission, finance, grants, of people who you might describe as being at the centre working within the education office. Other people who are also employed in the service and the centre, majority of which are providing peripatetic and support to schools such as education psychologists, school attendance service, education development officers, share nurses, career staff. They're all included within that central picture, but the majority aren't working in an office. They're working out and about, working with schools, supporting schools, challenging schools, monitoring what's happening in schools. I think that we run pretty lean with regards to how we develop and how we support all of our schools and settings centrally. And I would say that we now have a structure in place which enables that our children, families and schools have the support and service that they need in order to run their business.
So because of that restructuring and what you're saying, are you essentially saying that there's been no increase in the number of full-time equivalent staff?
I couldn't give you that number off the top of my head. I have a structure in front of me, but short of sitting down and counting them all out now, I couldn't do that. What I would say is it's not the finances that we put in place are costing no more than they were before.
Okay, because you're right, the focus is often on the number of staff, and I appreciate it's not that simple when you're doing things like restructuring, but obviously there's been a fair bit of focus recently, particularly last week, on the number of staff that are employed by the state. So that's where my question was coming from.
Yeah, and I completely get. I mean, we obviously review on an annual basis when we're looking at our budget how we bring in all of our expenditure in line with what we're given on an annual basis, and make those challenging decisions and have discussions around how all of our staff are allocated and what we can do better or differently.
Thank you. And talking of the state's debate last week, while we're on the subject, and this is very much a political question, I think, how do you reconcile your committee's intent to invest in children's education through, for example, the redevelopment of the Guernsey Institute, when essentially you've just voted to defund the state's capital programme?
So you're asking about my voting, are you?
Well, all the members of education on not approving the budget as it stood.
Well, obviously, looking back to the debate last week, I think that it's fair to say that a lot of this is about confidence. And confidence that things will be delivered in regards to the leadership of policy and resources, and how proposals from previous tax debates were expected to materialise, and the fact that they haven't. And so I think it is difficult to start to reopen that debate and people's rationales for voting in. Certainly my rationale, I'm not prepared to go into it in the midst of a Scrutiny Management Committee hearing about which should be about our mandate. And certainly in regards to the consequences that any decisions that the states as a body corporate took last week, because of course yourself, you voted in the same way that I did. I think that what we need to do is, as a committee, we need to understand what those risks are, and obviously the committee, you won't be surprised, the risk of the state's decisions always features within the risk register of the Les Osway campus because of previous history with the TEP programme board. We have always ensured that now, since the programme was defunded, on a couple of occasions, that the risk register has noted political decision making as necessarily either variously amber or red as according to what topic is on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into a states debate, but I didn't vote the same way that you did. But that's.
I do apologise.
No,
I
that's
thought you
but
voted
no,
for
no,
1B.
but that's by the by. What we're talking about here, and you refer to your committee's mandate, is the funding of, in this case, as per my question, the funding of the Guernsey Institute, which, you know, you only need to pick up the press today, and that is now at risk because of what the states decided last week.
Well, of course, what we weren't deciding last week was the funding and investment plan, because that has already been decided. The Les Osway campus is, and the TEP programme is very, very far advanced. And certainly we are nearing the completion of the phase 2 tender, and I'm able to bring in officers to give an update on what progress that we are there. But certainly we were discussing tax options and the funding of revenue for budget, not of capital projects. So I think it'd be helpful if officers were able to give an update on the progress of...
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll just read out the quote from the Chief Minister. There are probably going to be disappointed people within the education system. I mean, I appreciate your point about revenue versus capital, and the states are going to have another debate about it, but there will be implications, as we all know, to the states not approving the budget, or at least the funding of it last week. I don't want to get bogged down in that, but in terms of the estate, after the scrutiny hearing last year, Deputy Haskins told us the consultants had advised the committee that the MAR was not fit for purpose for the medium or long term. So with no funding in sight currently to commence work on the sixth form centre, how will you deal with this issue if, as looks possible, it runs on longer than 4 years?
So are you asking Deputy Haskins or myself?
Deputy Haskins or yourself?
Yeah. Before I do, I think it's what I'd like to do is highlight that as we're sitting in front of you now as members of Education, Sport and Culture, when we're in the Assembly, we have many different hats. We're also members of Education, Sport and Culture. We're also parliamentarians, deputies that need to make wider, holistic decisions on what we think is good or the best thing for the island long term. With regards to your question on Lamar, there has been investment already, and it is in plans. I appreciate right now you're questioning all funding because of the budget. Now, the States doesn't stop just because of the decisions that we've made, and there are different budgets like minor capital that will continue to make sure that education, buildings in general in the States are appropriately maintained.
Mr. Hines was going to give us an update on how the Institute was progressing and the contracts for that. That would be interesting.
I'll invite Ed Brown, who's our Programme Director, to give an update on aspects around the Transforming Education Programme build side.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to the table. I appreciate what I'm about to say will probably be well known to all of you, but I hope you don't mind me taking a step back. In January of this year, the States made a very clear decision to phase the overarching investment in the Osway campus, with phase 1 being wholly focused on further education, so the Guernsey Institute, and phase 2, which is not a funded element of the current capital portfolio, being the creation of a new sixth form centre. If we look at phase 1, which is, I believe, what Deputy Dudley Owen briefly referred to, the progress there has been very good in the 10 months we've had since the January debate. So the demolition works of the old St Peter Port School, which is a prerequisite for any new build there, clearly has now completed, subject to final work on checking any contamination under the old boiler plant on that site. The enabling works, which enable us to then move rapidly into future construction, are also progressing well. We've now completed some works within the building of a performing arts centre, and as of last week have commenced construction of a roadway around the site. And that roadway is dual purpose. It both enables the building works, but it's also the permanent roadway which goes around the outside of a performing arts centre and behind it for the new site design. And then third, and certainly not least, we are now in the tail end of the procurement process for the main construction works. That procurement process has had in itself 2 stages, which has always been the advice we've received from procurement services about the best way to deliver this particular form of contract. The first has been to identify the prime contractor, which will be ROC, as I believe was publicly announced in the summer. And then the second is working with ROC to agree the supply chain they have to themselves on an open book basis. Just to give you a sense of that, we have over 150 quotes being requested from the local and UK construction market to ensure we get best value for money, spread across well into double digits worth of subcontracted packages of work. And it's that complexity of supply chain which is precisely why we have this 2-phase prime and subcontractor market. It's not advised in this instance to simply go to one company and say, what's it going to cost you? And they deliver all of it. It's best to have that clarity and transparency that they are seeking value for money. That process is now in its final stages, due to complete before Christmas, and we'd be anticipating bringing the request to the Policy and Resources Committee to enter contract, full contract for all that work early in 2025. So that's progressing well. What that doesn't address, just for clarity, is anything to do with what was described as phase 2, or the second phase of potential investment at the Osway campus. It doesn't touch on the sixth form centre, which is a separate matter.
Thank you.
Just one final question, just to close off this particular part of the hearing. The sixth form centre is being moved to the Marda Carteret next September. A cost of $140,000 was budgeted for bringing the facilities up to standard for the next 4 years. Has that budget proved sufficient? Yeah.
Sorry, let me just find my figures on that. Apologies.
This is the subject of a press report today, which members of the panel might have not the budget, but actually the new sixth form down at the Marda Carteret has been covered.
So thank you. So from the major capital portfolio, we are currently anticipating that we'll spend between £104,000 and £119,000 of to invest in the Marda Carteret in a way which is not reusable when the sixth form centre eventually moves to Lock, if that makes sense. In addition to that, there is funding for items which will initially be used at the Marda Carteret on an interim basis and then moved on to a permanent home, which we've had. So yes. A very practical example, which is included in current plans, is new very safe bike shelters. So ensuring we have those, we'll initially use them at the Marda Carteret and move them on to.
That's helpful, because I think 140,000 seemed in the context a remarkably small amount of money to do what needed to do, but that adds some very helpful clarity. Thank you.
For complete transparency, in the summer of 2024, so the summer past, some funding was undertaken out of minor capital as well, an 80,000 sum there, 80
right.
On the Marda Carteret. So overall, the level of investment is still very low, and it's in line with the releases we have from the
But it's closer to, say, 200,000 for stuff that can't be moved?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Deputy de Summary.
Thank you. I'd just like to move on to the area of attainment and choice and things like that. Do GCSE students now have access to the same curriculum choice at all the state's secondary schools? And am I correct in thinking that the maximum number of GCSEs that can be opted for is now 9?
Those are quite specific questions, and obviously you know that we have gone through some significant curriculum alignment across our secondary schools. So if I can hand Nick.
We're going through a process across all our secondary schools, as Deputy Dudley Owen said, of curriculum alignment, so that by September 2025 all of our secondary schools will be offering the same curriculum and the same option choices. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head about what the maximum number of options are for young people at GCSE, because there are some areas and some schools at the moment who also offer additional subjects where young people study outside those hours as well. For example, I know that Lamar de Carteret last year also offered Spanish GCSE as part of an additional class that they did out of hours. But from September 2025, all of those curriculum areas and options will be aligned across all of those secondary schools.
Okay, and so do we know what the choice is looking like from September next year?
Yes.
Okay, and am I right in thinking that choice will be, there won't be additional subjects that you can do? Is one of the things I'm interested in actually is how our system supports the most capable and aspirational students. So, for example, those that would be interested in taking additional GCSEs, will there be anything in the system to enable them to do that, or will they be constrained to that core choice?
Well, the delivery of the curriculum and delivery of those options and GCSEs will be up to the executive leadership team across the secondary school partnership. So if they were to find that there were a number of students across the partnership who were looking to study a particular subject that wasn't being offered at the moment, then they would review that and see whether they could offer a subject across the partnership rather than in an individual school.
So there will be that.
So, well, they will review that on an annual basis, but what we're saying is there is a core set of options, a core set of subjects that all schools will offer. But that doesn't mean to say that in the future they wouldn't offer an additional subject across the partnership if there were 2 children from each school, for example, who wanted to access a different subject.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to just take a break now, because we'll take a comfort break now, and as previously mentioned, we'll undertake a 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock. So thank you very much.
According to your published figures for 2024, 60% of grades attained at states-maintained schools were grade 4 or higher, compared with nearly 69% at English comprehensives. Looking at just grade 7 or higher, the figure in English comprehensives was 19.4%. What was the equivalent percentage in Guernsey states-maintained schools for grade 7 and higher?
Sorry, for which could you repeat that?
Yes, of course. It's GCSE. The GCSE results have been published, and we were able to compare with English schools' results. What I'm trying to understand is the distribution of grades. So we understand what the distribution of grades is from grade 4 and above, which some people refer to as a pass rate. But what I'm trying to understand, because I couldn't find the information in the public domain, was the distribution of grades in terms of grades 7, 8 and 9. So what percentage of the grades in our states-maintained schools were grades 7 or higher?
Okay, so this is different from the questions that you've asked in the Rule 14 questions last week?
Yes.
Okay, right, that's fine. Sorry, yes, I think that, Nick, you've got the...
Yeah, we... Deputy St-Pierre asked, after we released the provisional results at the end of August, what percentage of grades were 7+. A percentage of all subjects which were 7+ was 22.8%, and England was 21.7%.
Thank you. It's really good to see that GCSE English language grades have improved in Guernsey, with 68.6% achieving grade 4 or higher. So my question really is just the same. It's about grade distribution. What percentage of students in the state sector in Guernsey achieve grade 7 or higher? Do we know? In English language. See how good he is at maths. That's the next bit.
In English language in Guernsey?
Yes, GCSE English language.
What's this one, isn't it?
No, that's England. That's Guernsey.
Okay.
In 2024.
Yes, please.
Sorry, and that will be state. That will be state schools, not the whole bailiwick.
Do you want me to come back to that? Give you a bit of time to.
I believe it's English language results 7, 8, and 9 is 19% in comparison to England, which is 14.6%.
Okay.
But that's me adding up now on the spot rather than you giving a total. Which all of these specific details will be included within the annual report when we do that.
In January, yes, exactly. I've got a slightly higher mark for England, but our maths may differ. Speaking of maths, why are our GCSE results in maths continuing to fall when this issue was identified in 2022 as being in need of intervention?
Yeah. So maths has been challenging for a number of different reasons. We've done some specific work in maths over the last few years in the same way we did with English, and we're now seeing fruition of those English results going up. We've done a review across all schools with regards to mathematics, I think about 18 months or so ago, and have now got a programme in place to improve maths across all of our settings. We're seeing fruition of those results going up, certainly within our primary schools and certainly within specific year groups within those primary schools. But it's fair to say that maths isn't quite where we want it to be just yet. We are seeing that improvement when we're looking not just at the overall end of Key Stage 4 results, but we do quite an in-depth view using GL assessments across all year groups in primary and secondary to really ascertain and pick out what year groups are doing better or not doing better. It is a fact that we have struggled last year across our secondary phase, in particular with regards to recruiting and retaining maths teachers. We're now putting together a plan on how we might improve that, but but it's a very complicated area, and maths recruitment isn't just necessarily about paying maths teachers more or giving them a golden handshake when they arrive. It's actually about what we can do to get all specialist teachers, whether they're maths teachers or anything else, over that 5-year hump, after which we see teachers maintaining and staying in the profession longer. There's a much higher percentage of teachers who leave the profession in the first 5 years. So what we're doing, and sharing with the committee in the next 2 weeks, is a programme by which we look at how we can recruit and retain those specialist teachers better, and linked to any financial reward, which doesn't necessarily always retain those teachers, is about looking to see what we can do to provide really high quality CPD, but also to see where there may be other teachers who are very good practitioners who may be interested in switching subjects or switching phases, and starting to do things a little bit differently to make sure we can maintain and look at those teachers in the future. I think what we would say around recruitment and retention, we touched on it earlier on. Our retention and recruitment in primary phase has been very strong. We had no vacancies across the primary phase at all in September. We had a much lower percentage of vacancies across secondary, and we halved our agency rate in the secondary phase in September, and a lot of that was around, as I said, the stabilisation of the secondary phase, but also the work that Head of Education Operations has done with HR around some of our media coverage and how we're targeting specific teachers in specific areas to come and live and work in Guernsey, and also how we can look to retain them in future.
Can I just come in and supplementary on that? You've mentioned some of your best teachers. I can't quite remember the word you use now, but clearly, different teachers will have different abilities. It's inevitable. If you've got a subject like maths where you are constantly struggling to get enough teachers, does that affect how you would deal with a teacher who you felt wasn't performing enough, because you really wouldn't want to lose any? But can you see there could be a dilemma there?
I can see you might think there's a dilemma, but our focus is always about making sure we have the highest quality teachers in front of our children on a daily basis. And you rue the day where you appoint somebody just because they happen to have a qualification if they're not very good in front of the children. And what we do is ensure through our head teachers, who hold teachers to account, support and challenge and monitoring what's happening within the class, to make sure that the quality of teaching and learning in all of our classes are high quality. And in the same way, when we're reviewing those through any of our internal reviews, it's always, if you have to ask yourself the question is, would I like my son, daughter in this class? And if the answer is no, you have to ask why necessarily you might continue with having that teacher or person there. What I would say is, I think the quality of our teaching and learning, the quality of our education as defined by Ofsted and external inspection, has undoubtedly improved significantly.
Okay,
I think the CPD that we're putting in place now, and I think we put on how many different training sessions last year? Over 282 different CPD sessions for all our teachers and staff last year, to give them confidence and to support them in their journey as well.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up. In the course of a year, or at your end of year reviews, how many teachers do you actually let go because they're not really performing as well as you think they should?
I mean, that's not something that we would necessarily get involved with centrally. All of our head teachers are autonomous with regards to managing and supporting all of their members of staff in school. And so if there are any performance issues in any of our schools, the head teacher would lead that process along with HR staff.
Can I ask you, who makes the decision about moving teachers between schools? So we know that, if there are teachers that move between the secondary partnership, who makes that call?
So that call is made between the education leadership team, which is the principals of the secondary school partnership, and the executive principal.
Okay. In discussion with a member of staff, you wouldn't want to force somebody to move without agreement.
Can I just move on to level 3 now? So the sixth form centre had a much lower rate of A star and A grades at A level than England. So according to my maths, it was just 14% compared with 27.6 in England. Do you have any insights as to why we achieved just half the proportion of those top grades in our sixth form centre when compared with England?
I think it's not a binary question. I think it's quite a complicated question, especially with regards to Guernsey itself. I think although the rate from at A to A star was lower than England. Our rate was 21.5 and England was 27.6. The A to A star within the sixth form centre last year actually increased. The Bailiwick figure includes all the colleges as well. I think it's also interesting that you have to bear in mind that the entry criteria into the sixth form centre is generally lower than the entry criteria to sixth forms in England, and it's also lower than the entry requirement to our grant-aided colleges. So the percentage of top grades, a number of children have to move a greater distance than might be expected either in the grant-aided colleges or indeed in some of our sixth form centres or sixth form colleges in England. The entry criteria for our entry for an A-level provision generally is a grade 4 and slightly higher for some of the specific subject areas like maths or physics, for example. But because we want to make sure that there is a greater opportunity for our young people to access A-level provision, the threshold is lower.
Okay. And do you think that's the right policy, given the sort of discrepancy that you've described?
I think if we could raise the entry criteria in the sixth form to a 5, 6 or 7, you would have less children having opportunity to access A-levels, but our A to A star would be higher. And I think living on an island where it is the only A-level provider in town, if you like, I think it's we are duty-bound to provide as many opportunities as we can to our young people to access those A-levels. And I think it's really important to also clarify that A to E is a pass in A-level. It's obviously a different grade, but it's a pass. And when you're looking around access to universities or any higher education, you don't necessarily have to have an A or an A star to access some of those provisions. So I think even though some of our young people are leaving maybe with C's, D's or E's, for those young people that is also a success from their starting point and giving them a pathway onto higher education, whatever course they might choose to go on, and we must give them those opportunities to access those A-level provision.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to class sizes, distribution and resourcing implications, if I may. Is it still the case that primary schools funding and their learning support assistants are allocated on the basis of the number of classes rather than the number of students? And if so, do you recognise that children at schools with larger class sizes may be disadvantaged by that policy?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so the question was about primary schools funding and learning support assistants. Are they allocated on the basis of the number of classes rather than the number of students?
So we have a policy which sets out how many learning support assistants are according to number of pupils across the whole of that school. It's not necessarily about the number of classes. That was a policy we applied before. So you have the number of LSAs according to the number on roll. But I think the really important thing to note is, and it comes back to the devolution question and devolvement question, is that when we had additional funding from COVID and when we had additional funding from the GWP to raise those numbers and the funding directly to primary in particular, we increased the number of LSAs across our primary school sector, and all of the funding we had through both of those pockets went straight into schools and nothing went centrally. And it was about ensuring that head teachers had those opportunities to make those decisions about where staff are best allocated across their school to meet the needs of all of their children and young people. Because in addition to the learning support assistants that the schools attract through that model, if you like, there's also additional support that we make available for those young people with additional needs according to how they present and what they might require. And again, we're allocating all of that additional support budget out to schools so that they can meet needs of those children much earlier through an early help model rather than having to apply to get additional support when a child presents towards them.
Given the sharp fall in student numbers entering reception this year, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, projected next year as well, resulting in the loss of 3 forms of entry across the primary sector. Do you have any concerns about next year's intake and the viability of any of the primary schools?
I think that we're obviously aware of population projections and a bulge moving through the school years, and I think due to end 29-30, and it is no secret that we have an issue with our fertility rate in terms of we are at 1.4, which Deputy Haskins speaks about quite a lot and raises the awareness of. And of course, what we haven't embarked on this term because of resourcing, and the state's approved that we wouldn't be undertaking a primary review this term. So I think for us to be preempting what the next committee might be looking at in September 2025, which obviously will be into a next political term, would be a little bit premature. But obviously these class sizes are managed, and school admissions is a science, and there is a formula around that and how this is distributed. So those numbers will be managed accordingly.
And discussions take place presumably with those schools.
Operationally, absolutely, yes, yeah. I mean, because it's a funny thing, isn't it, that when the committee have devolved a lot of this work down to schools to be working with Education Office. So it's a little bit of an irony, isn't it, when we talk about devolution delegation, that actually there are some things that have already been devolved and delegated to schools with Education Office to work with quite in a manageable way, so head teachers are able to manage their schools accordingly.
How is that managed practically? Do you give the schools leave to broaden their catchment areas? How does it work?
No, not in that instance, in terms of how...
No, I think we manage admissions centrally, and that's the most efficient and effective way of ensuring that there is that all of our primary schools are run cost effectively, actually, because it may be that because our catchment areas are where they're set. And we will go to parents according to whether they're on the border of different areas about whether they would accept a place in a different school. If one school is filled up from their reception and another has got lots of places, we don't want to run inefficient reception classes of 50% unless they're already a one-form entry school, which is challenging. You asked the question about is it a worry? I think we would anticipate next year to lose forms of entry because, as I say, the population for children is going down, and I think although it's raised as part of the Management Scrutiny Committee for Education, Sport and Culture, I think it's a much wider issue for the whole of Guernsey to consider. Certainly 12 years or so ago, the average cohort size entering our education system was 650, 680. I believe that our birth rate for the cohort which will enter in 27-28 is 417. So you can see that there's quite a significant rate of drop of cohort, which is only going to make everybody across the whole states of Guernsey think about how we're going to move forward.
So in which case, do you think some consolidation of the primary schools is inevitable?
Well, I mean, obviously the last states said that they were going to review that post the next election, 2025, and a primary review, I think the committee would recognise, and we recognise, would be inevitable with regards to looking at what the future system of primary education, how many places are required to be available in the future.
And with the projections, was it a missed opportunity?
I don't think so, because of course, first of all, what we're doing is preempting the terms of reference of those particular that particular primary review, and predicating outcome. And your question was, is it inevitable that you look to consolidate or rationalise primary schools? Well, I don't think that is an inevitability based on the fact that we don't actually have a terms of reference yet, so we wouldn't be able to determine what is inevitable or not. And I don't think it's a missed opportunity at all, because there were so many other things to sort out within education. You just simply can't do it all. And certainly in my 6 years, having within my 8-year term, sitting twice on the committee, one thing that I really do know is that education is a very complex business, especially in the delivery of high quality education and your aspiration towards that. And it's often underestimated, the amount of work that needs to go in, and especially in transforming an education system fit for the 21st century. So I don't think that it's a missed opportunity at all. I think that the work would just simply not have been able to be done at the same time. And I don't think the community would have stomached the work being done on a primary review, in addition to reorganisation of secondary, and to have created disruption in every single phase and across the education estate.
And can I? Sorry. I'm just going to add that I think what's really important is that by managing those admissions centrally, we can ensure that those classes that are coming into our schools are run in the most cost-efficient and effective way. So if we don't require all those forms of entries, it means we don't always require all of those teachers. So there's some natural wastage, and then there's some way that we also use those teachers to boost and look at, for example, the island-wide teaching cohort, which means we're no longer relying on supply or agency teachers across our primary phase, which has actually been a really cost-effective way of ensuring all of our young people have qualified teachers in front of them who are really well equipped to dealing with their learning needs.
One quick follow-up. Can you use catchment areas and moving them slightly from year to year to balance things a little bit better than they might otherwise do? Is that something you do?
We don't do it formally through changing the catchment areas, because we would have to keep doing that year on year. We look at the cohort, and we look,
boundaries,
line by line, where do people live, where is the most optimum way for us to use our schools and our classes, and we have conversations with schools, we talk to parents, and we try where possible to do it through agreement, although sometimes we just have to say there is no space and we're offering you a place here.
Thank you. Can I step back slightly to the attainment? At Beaucamp, the largest maths class sizes across all the year groups are between 30 and 34 students, which I think to most people would seem quite a high number. Do you think the size of classes there has some bearing on the maths attainment at GCSE?
Can I just start by saying, before I hand over, I think that it's, I was speaking before, you mentioned class sizes, and when we were talking about managing numbers within schools, this is an area that there is, that head teachers look to manage for their own schools. So that's what I was talking about in terms of the devolution and delegation of that sort of management rather than actually the admissions. So just to hand over.
Yeah, and I'll start, and then I'll invite Claire to add some additional comment. The average, obviously we can look at the largest class size, for example, at Beaucamp and other schools. We also need to take into consideration what the smallest class size is. And very often, the largest class sizes are those young people who are more able academically and cognitively to work within a large class as well. And obviously we try and then minimise the class size for those who might require additional needs. What's also not included in there as well is that although there is a teacher to those largest or smallest class sizes, there is very often in some of those learning support assistants who may provide that additional adult supervision as well. But the question around whether the size of the class has an impact on the attainment, particularly in maths, I think you asked, was something that we have looked at, and Claire might be able to add some detail.
Thank you. So, it's logical to think that the two might be related, but in fact they're not. Okay. They're not related at all. If they were related, we'd expect St Anne's, which always has, for obvious reasons, small class sizes, to always get the highest results, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Beaucamp, interestingly for maths, has the highest class size in 2024, but actually got the highest results for maths of all of the secondary schools. So it's not a simple correlation.
There's no real correlation. Okay, thank you. What factors explain the 14% fall in the number of students enrolling in the sixth form centre between 2022 and 2024?
I haven't got that information in
No,
front of me.
that's
Sorry.
fine. It's just we noted that the numbers on the responses to the Rule 14 questions, the numbers had fallen for the intake in the sixth form centre at year 12.
I
So,
think
but
that's,
happy for the committee to come back
that's
to
something
us.
we can look at, and I think
Yeah.
it needs to be looked at in correlation with what the recruitment numbers were into the Guernsey Institute as well, because sometimes
well,
it's
of course, and I think
cohort
there's
driven, and sometimes
the institute, the
it's,
colleges, people taking different courses understand that. But just interested if you had any
that's something we can
interest
look
on
at.
it. Okay. Deputy Dyke, I think.
Yes, I think I've got the next question, which is, how many teachers are currently teaching outside their trained specialist subject? And I suppose that would be particularly important in something like maths.
I'm not sure we have that to hand.
I haven't. I may have that information, but I haven't got it to hand.
Right, okay.
Deputy Fairclough.
Is this on 27? 25. Okay, so in your update statement, you mentioned that the committee has created a small pool of full-time island-wide teachers in the primary sector, developed by using diverted money. How much was this diverted money, and where was it diverted from?
I haven't got the figures about the cost of that in particular, but it's been diverted from some existing supply budget which was available across the primary phase, and also a reduction of those cohort. So reallocating where a teacher wasn't required within the primary phase where the cohort dropped. I think what has happened though as a result is we're now using those teachers who are centrally employed to actually make sure that there is always qualified teachers in front of all those primary school children. And what it's actually doing as well, which is really cost effective, is it's allowing when there is not illness or sickness across our primary phase, it's enabling those teachers to provide additional support in those schools to release teachers to either develop curriculum, to attend CPD, to support individual children who might have very specific needs, and work on school improvement across the school. So the cost has been a zero cost, if you like, but it's just about reallocating those from those two areas to enable us to use that funding better. And it's meant that, say, those primary school head teachers will probably tell you that they now have additional access to teaching days than they had before.
Okay, but you're happy to confirm the value of that?
Absolutely.
After this hearing. Thank you.
The value as in monetary terms?
Yeah.
Yeah. We can find that out for you. But what I'm saying is that value that we'll share with you isn't an additional cost.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the private colleges. I think that 2025-26 is the last year you're making the grant. How much is that? And are there any plans for any continued support after that in cash or any other ways?
I think the agreement is around 3 million at the moment. I think 3.3 at the moment, and next year will be 3, closer to 3. So you're right, in fact, in the fact that the agreement comes to an end in 2026. Thereafter, there would have to be another agreement in place. But the committee, by myself, is in negotiations with the colleges as to what that looks like and how that looks like, whether that comes back to the state. So I think at this moment it would be inappropriate to comment any further on it. But what I would do is highlight Proposition 28 of the budget that was just in the Assembly. And I think that proposition got unanimous support, and it's relating to savings for from the coming out of the sub-savings committee, for which Deputy Soulsby did assure members that the results of such will be published, and they relate to the Tier 1 grants.
So is it your intention, Deputy Haskins, and you may or may not be able to confirm this subject to the negotiations, I suppose, but is that decision going to come back to the states?
As I said, I think because of the negotiations that we're having, I think it'd be inappropriate to comment further at this time. But whatever decision and whatever does come out can, by request, if it's not brought to the states as a policy letter. So at this time, I think.
And when do you hope to conclude the negotiations by?
As soon as possible. I think by the end of the year.
By the end of this year.
So is the inference I can draw, I understand that you can't discuss actual figures going beyond what's already been contracted, the 3 million as the 2025-2026 payment. But is it the intention of the committee that whatever follows on from that, it won't be zero?
I think, as I said, Deputy Burford, in light of the current negotiations that are happening, I think it would be inappropriate for me to comment any further at this time.
Can I, at the risk of pushing that, and I do appreciate the sensitivities around it, but just so I understand the sort of practicalities, you've already given us some figures, which I'm grateful. So presumably what you're discussing is what happens from September 2026 onwards. Is it your suggestion that is something that would be preferable to make in this political term or in the next political term, or do you not see that it matters either way?
No, I think that absolutely it will be in this political term.
Thank you. Best of luck with it.
I think we're moving on to the area of your mandate, sport and culture. You announced a review into Beausejour a year ago to be published by the middle of this year. When do you now expect this review to be published?
I think there are 4 stages. Stage 1 and 2 should be, recommendations should be going to policy and resources in Q1 of 25.
Okay, and in the terms of reference to the review, the committee acknowledges that a facility like Beausejour creates many intangible benefits, things that you can't measure so easily, such as a sense of community and health and well-being. How easy is it, and has it been, to evaluate the cultural capital and health aspects of Beausejour in what ultimately, of course, is an exercise driven by financial concerns?
Yes, not easy, but that is why we have consultants who are working with us to ascertain that. There's many stakeholders now on that review panel, from charities, business, public health. I myself am part of that from an oversight point of view, and not as any meaningful voting point of view. But absolutely, those are the questions for that review.
And are you happy that those issues are going to be addressed and form part of the outcome of the review, rather than it being purely driven by finances, which is often the easy thing to look at?
Absolutely, I think that was why the scope of the review, and because of previous debates on the Les Osway campus. And so I'm talking about the sports hall and provision there. I think with the people that we have in the room there, absolutely, it's given credence to these very questions. I don't know, Damon, if you wanted to...
Yeah, just Just to add to that, I think it's a very good question, and it's important that the review does actually understand what the product is and what purpose it serves before any decisions about its future are taken. So the aspects that Deputy Haskins referred to, it involves things like inclusivity, it's matters of the fact that it's a community hub, it's preventative healthcare, it meets cultural and art support, community engagement. So there's a number of functions that Beausejour undertakes at the moment. So the first step would be understanding what that is, how that's valued, and then moving on to the next stage in terms of what the options might be for the future.
Dare I sort of raise the question that is that why the review has taken longer than perhaps you originally thought? Because there are all of these very many aspects that need to be considered.
Well, I think necessarily getting all the right people in the room, so youth sector and public health, sports clubs and the rest of it, has taken a little bit longer. However, the Q 2025 is due to be met.
Yes, looking into the viability of the of Beausejour, I've just taken into account all the points you've made about the social benefits and issues to be considered. But will the review include outsourcing and possibly privatising? And in particular now, at planning we've done a call for sites, and there is thought that possibly some of the land around Beausejour, part of the car parks, might be brought forward for housing. Is that going to be part of that overall review?
Well, I'm not going to jump to what I think that the review will be, but needless to say, there is a representative from estate and project management opportunities. So, again, the review is very, very broad, but there are the right people in the room, especially from the cultural side and from the cultural side.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a question that leads out of this, and you might think it's too early to answer it, but it's one I'm going to ask anyway. Would you favour, this isn't just a question to you, Deputy Haskins, but Deputy Dudley-Owen as well, would you favour the creation of a new committee, very topical given discussions about housing, for instance, which are due before the States in December? Would you favour the creation of a new committee with specific responsibility for sport and the arts?
There's varying views on this. I don't actually really have a particular view myself, because I think that the S&C side of our mandate, the sports and culture, is really, really vital for the island as a whole, for many different reasons. And it fits well with education, but it also fits well with economic development. And so as a standalone, obviously, we've tried that. And variously, I think it was there was an arts committee, and then separate cultural committee and separate heritage committee previously, and then it's all been amalgamated and to a broader committee, which was then added on to education. Jersey do it with economic development, and there's some success there. I think there's various ways to slice these pies, and really the most important thing is having a really good strategic approach to it all. However you're carving it up is sort of irrelevant, because if you don't have a good strategic long-term approach to the mandate and the policy areas, then you could have it as a standalone or in conjunction with another area, and it fail. And one thing that we are starting to get to grips with is that more strategic approach, obviously, with regards to arts and sport, with the development of arts strategy and obviously Activate, and heritage has started to shape much more in a strategic way, but that needs further development next term. So to me, I haven't got a view on it, and I think that it can work well either way, but obviously it's got to be in that bigger strategic picture, and what we're lacking in this particular term is a greater vision about what it is and where we're going with Guernsey, which makes it ultimately difficult for any particular committee to be able to know whether they're pulling in the right direction, because of course we've got nothing to benchmark against or pull towards. So it could be that within a wider strategic vision for Guernsey in of itself, that a standalone S&C committee might fare better, or staying with this particular committee, or even indeed with economic development. So I think it's difficult to say. We're sort of working in a bit of a void of greater strategic purpose at the moment. That's sort of for the states of Guernsey as a whole, as opposed to this particular committee.
And I sympathise, Deputy Haskins, with getting all the people in the room when you're trying to progress things. I'd like to ask a question now about Delancey Park. I understand, and please correct me if this is not the case, that ESC operates some paid parking with an agreement to use the income to help maintain the park, in addition to its other responsibilities to that public facility. However, the SMC is aware of public concerns surrounding the maintenance of the park, including the car park. Can the President assure us this matter is being addressed?
I must admit to not knowing about the issue relating to paid parking and the issues arising around that. Obviously, we have a working relationship with St Sampson's Douzane around the management of the park, and I did meet with one of the Douzaniers and also our facilities manager and have a walk around. I think it was in the summertime, and looking at plans for that. But obviously, that is an operational matter that I think we'll take away and look into and revert if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Actually, while I'm speaking, can I just take you back, Deputy Haskins, to your responses on the Marder Carteret? And I think you gave us a very helpful response, but I think I didn't quite pick up on the main thrust of the question, I think, which was that at the moment there are no plans for the construction of the sixth form centre itself to go ahead, other than the construction of the foundations. I think that's the point that we're at, and indeed the funding thereof. So I don't suppose anyone can say with any certainty at the moment how long the sixth form centre will be located at Le Marder Carteret. Now, taking you back to when you said that your advice was that it would not be suitable, from a consultant, that it would not be suitable in the medium or long term, and accepting that medium term might have various definitions, what is the committee's view? Have you given thought to what you will do with Le Marder Carteret should it run on longer than you had hoped?
I think it would be helpful to get a little bit of facts around the length of time that the Marder Carteret building is deemed to be usable.
Yes, that'd be helpful.
Until we would need to make significant capital investment in that. Ed, would you?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again. So obviously, once the decision was made at the beginning of year, and to inform that decision around the phasing of the Osway campus, we took independent advice as to the likely lifespan of Le Marder Carteret. Mm-hmm. The focus at that time was to ensure that the intent, which we're now executing to use it as an interim home for the sixth form, was going to provide value for money and be appropriate, and we received that confirmation. The independent advice we had on it from memory, and I would need to confirm this outside of the room, is that a window of 5 years was a reasonable assumption for the ongoing use of that building. I think what's really pertinent in this context, though, is that the advice we've received is not that you then hit a magic point and the building is unusable. It is not as if there is a time bomb issue such as some form of asbestos which will suddenly become unacceptable from a health and safety perspective or anything like that after a certain date. What the states will be dealing with, if it decides to continue the use of Le Marder Carteret for any purpose beyond that window, is an ever ramping risk of material costs to keep the site in use. Mm-hmm. We hold contingency in our programme budget for the window in question, for the interim period through to 29, should the result of fiscal and economic decisions mean that it would need to be held in use for longer. And again, that's either as a sixth form centre or any other use. The states would need to consider and hold an ever-growing contingency budget for material costs. What you're likely to see is situations where you need to take a system within the school, and I'll take the example of Windows, where you move from a phase where individual windows might fail and you need to replace individual windows, and you hit a point where actually the value for money approach would be to replace all the windows on that site because they've all hit an age, and suddenly you start getting much bigger increments in the level of cost. So I think we can provide this Scrutiny Management Committee with assurance that there is not some drop-dead moment where Lamada Carteret becomes unusable, but rather that the cost of keeping it usable is likely to grow beyond that sort of 5-year window.
Yeah, thank you.
And one of my recollections of conversations around exactly that issue with the consultant was the structural integrity of the fascia, I believe. Have there been any further checks to see whether that risk has stayed the same or decreased or increased? How are you monitoring the risks in order to make those judgments?
So I'd need to defer to colleagues in the State's Property Unit for that day-to-day monitoring and management of the sites. As an education programme, we are simply focused on the additional investments that are required for a specific use over a period of time. So State's Property Unit has a programme where it monitors and maintains all sites and identifies priority investments that are required. So as a programme we haven't, but that's not to say that State's Property Unit hasn't.
I'll just add there that actually the way in which that's approached by the committee is we get regular updates from State's Property Unit to tell us about, to report in and determine key performance indicators in terms of how they are achieving their targets and how they are liaising with head teachers within the school environment, but also in our capacity as governing board members, we are able to speak in every single school setting about that relationship, but also if they're experiencing any particular risks around the fabric and material of their buildings, or indeed, fire alarms, etc. And we're able to take those away and ensure that operationally those particular barriers to them getting the solutions that they need are looked at. So that there is a process around facilities management that sort of sits with the committee, but also enters into the governing board process as well, so we can hold them to account.
And are you satisfied as a committee that there is the budget in place for the necessary property maintenance across the estate?
We can always do with more, can't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you speak to State's Property Unit, they'll say that there's been a historic underinvestment, so would require more funds. It's about prioritisation and choosing which maintenance issues you're going to deal with first. Some of the schools have issues being older buildings where there's a lack of expertise on the island for larger projects, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to find people, and necessarily sometimes you have to go over to the UK, and that will be sometimes very expensive.
Given the debate last week, are you happy that your educational estate is being maintained better than social housing?
Yes. Well, only from the anecdotal point of what we heard in debate. Obviously, it's not our committee mandate, and we are not able to go and see the ESS portfolio. Deputy Summary would be able to speak to that as to whether they felt that it was being adequately maintained from a committee point of view. But certainly, we have seen a great improvement in the run rate through issues arising and maintenance happening. I think the committee has done a really good job in getting the State's Property Unit relationship to a point now where we feel much more confident, and that relationship is a triangular relationship between the head teachers within the schools, but also back into reporting into the committee so that we can hold them to account on how they're doing. What we don't know is how that relationship sits with, obviously, policy and resources, because the State's Property Unit sits underneath them. But we're also doubly assured and have much greater detail, much more detail than I can really describe in the short time that we have now, in regards to our knowledge, having sat on the governing boards, and our ability to be able to hold head teachers also to account on how they manage their relationship. So as a political board, we've been able to receive thematics coming from those governing boards. So if more than 3 governing boards are reporting that there's a problem with facilities management, we're able to test that policy in committee, and we would hope that that would continue later as that particular governance model continues and refines. So there's much more scrutiny and accountability towards property maintenance than there's ever been before.
Right, that sounds good.
Given the degree of variance between the ages of the different buildings and the school settings, are there any particular schools or school settings that you're particularly concerned about, Lamar de Carteret High School accepted?
I think it would have to be the older schools. I mean, Vovert is a case in point. I think that was built in 1909, I'm going to say. I think maybe 1902. But it is an old school. It was originally built as a secondary school, and then obviously over the years has changed into a primary. They're extremely constrained on their site, but also the age of the building. Notre Dame as well has similar concerns. Obviously it's a converted convent, and obviously they're over 2 sites. So there are specific buildings within the education estate that do have greater amounts, but obviously there's also a relationship within the Notre Dame with the Catholic, with the diocese as well, that has to be considered as well. But yes, we are cognizant of those operational issues, and which is why it does form part of a great deal of our conversations within our governing board meetings, and also we put a lot of priority on it when we're meeting with the State's Property Unit and the facilities teams.
I think you've raised 2 really interesting and good examples, but we're seeing an increasing concentration of people living in town. And yet we know that those are the schools quite often with the most significant constraints. You've mentioned 2 who are very spatially constrained. And I believe Vovert's fire assembly point is actually down at Trinity Square. Have you got any thoughts as to how to increase the capacity of schools, especially in the primary sector, in the town area? Have you had any discussions about how you might be able to do that? Because obviously these constraints are likely to only intensify given the population and geographic trends.
I would expect that matters like that would be part of a primary review without obviously preempting the terms of reference. You'd have to put that all in the mix in order for the primary review to be as meaningful and as helpful as possible to what the output and recommendations of that might be.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, no.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had mentioned earlier that the previous states had agreed to put the primary review into the next political term. Actually, that the previous committee intended it to be done at the start of this political term, and it was this states that kicked that one into the long grass. In terms of the practicalities, if there are going to be any structural, big sort of macro scale structural movements, I'm just quite concerned about the length of time that might take to feed through into any meaningful changes. And we've got the sort of increasing cost inefficiencies and these increasing constraints. Does anyone on the panel have any sort of insight as to when, if a primary review is indeed taken early in the next political term, when we might see some of those changes actually taking effect at that highest level?
I mean, the only thing I can say is, having been involved in some of the work when St Sampson's Infants and St Andrews was shut, it's going to be dependent upon the timescale of the committee in post at the time decide they want to taper down any access to any school, if indeed that committee decides they want to look at closure of a primary school. You won't see the full cost benefit of any of those until the end of that process.
And I would add as well, I think that it'd be, it's not a fair question really, because there's so many things that would have to be put in place in order to be really sure of what your timescale would be, and you're essentially predetermining an outcome even in answering that question, which we just simply aren't able to do. And I've been very reluctant to tie myself to any responses relating to a primary review, because I do not have a predisposed sort of terms of reference in my head about what that primary review would need to take into consideration. I think we've got to be really open-minded, and there's a huge amount of factors that need to be taken into consideration, really about what does the Guernsey community want in terms of their primary schools. Really we have to be driven by that, as well as the need going up into our secondary schools, and how that fits. And there's a lot of determinants within that in terms of population and distribution, etc., etc. So I think to try and tie us down now to timelines is really, it's not sensible.
Okay, can I move to Deputy Fairclough then, please?
Yeah, I mean, moving towards a close. We've talked and to some degree speculated about what the next ESC committee may bring back before the states, and touched on education, law, college funding, future of Beausejour. What remaining policy letters can we expect from your committee before the end of this term?
Definitely a policy letter on governance, and. I don't know. I can't say anything further than that. The definitive one is governance, but I'm not at a position to be able to say that there'd be anything else at this stage.
Okay, and the governance one, which states meeting are you aiming for that? For that one?
Early in 2025.
Can I just come back on that? Because presumably if there are any, we've only got until April to debate policy letters. So if there are any others coming, you would clearly know about them now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean. Is that certainly from where I'm sitting, the definitive one that we've got coming to the Assembly.
Right. So you don't expect there to be any others? From
No. I mean, we've had conversations. I think around HERM, and maybe an assumption that the committee might bring a policy letter about that. I think that's up to policy and resources to bring any. Issues that might arise out of the use of our budget in any emergency budget that they board.
Okay.
What's stopping the rest of the education law coming forward this term? Wouldn't it be logical to try and get it sorted?
Purely resources, actually, Deputy Dyke. As I said, I think that it is certainly the states meeting that we've had last week. There was a big focus, without much evidence, around the amount of officers that we work with, and it is an absolute myth that we have, an abundance of policy officers in supporting us with our work. We really, really don't. It's a very small team, and we are having to use our human resources very wisely and to prioritise the work that they do. And obviously that's not always within our gift, because if, for example, the funding and investment plan where the Les Osway campus was deprioritised, then obviously those policy officers are stood up again, another again, to assist us with that debate. HERM Raquette, again, those policy officers are taken off the work that they were doing previously to assist with that debate. The work plan for the education law was essentially ripped up and had to be prolonged. Again, those officers taken off the forecast business as usual that they would envisage doing, and to have to work. We're nothing if not adaptable and fleet of foot, and the policy team is very responsive and hugely supportive, despite there being few in numbers but very high quality.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, just going back to the policy letter. The committee, via myself, is in negotiations with the grant-aided colleges, and there may or may not be a policy letter, as I mentioned.
Thank you, Catherine. I think that brings us to 12 o'clock in that case. So I would like to say thank you all for attending and, you know, increasing the public knowledge of the work that you do on your committee. I think it really is appreciated. We undertake regular hearings, as you know, so I'll just give you advance notice of our next one, which is with Policy and Resources, and that will actually be this Friday. A different location, however, it's at the Coathills, and again starting at 10 o'clock. So thank you, everyone, and the hearing is closed.